casual. I kind of want this to be more like a conversation, so if anybody has any questions or anything they want to talk about as I'm going through it, feel free to just like raise your hand or shout out and I'll talk. So what we're going to talk about today is better financial services through behavioral science and design. Full disclosure, I'm not a behavioral scientist, but I am the director of design, so I can talk to that at LendUp. And LendUp is, what is LendUp? That's a great question that I'm asking rhetorically. LendUp is a technology company that builds products that expand credit access and choice to folks that banks don't serve. What that actually means is, around 40% of the U.S. can't get access to a $5 loan if they need it. This is a problem. There's a bunch of people that are subprime and post-prime that just have no access to the traditional financial products that most of us enjoy. So the goal of LendUp is to give these people access to liquidity in order to smooth over the sorts of financial bumps that they encounter in their lives, and B, to help get them back into prime credit markets so that they can rejoin prime credit markets and all the benefits that those bring with it. Our first product to sort of address this need is an alternative to payday loans. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with payday loans, but is everybody here familiar with payday loans as a concept?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so you're probably familiar with the idea that payday loans are bad.
I've never done one.
They are bad. They are not good products the way that they are generally presented. And the reasons that they're bad are they are debt traps. They are built often to keep people in a cycle of debt. Basically having to roll over and refinance these loans. There's all kinds of horror stories that are true and legitimate about people borrowing $250 at some point and paying back thousands over the course of numerous rollovers and months of bad stuff. Shifty players with bad business models is another reason that the payday loans are bad. So these companies have been built from the ground up to help incur fees on their borrowers, and their borrowers are basically trapped in the fact they don't have access to other products. So these players in the industry are incentivized to keep people in these debt traps, and their business models are based on that. So unwinding that is very difficult for them. Basically, they are chutes. That's the bottom line is they are chutes into a debt trap. Payday loans. That's the basic gist of why they're bad. So LendUp is good. I'm gonna go out on a limb and just say we're good, and I'm not going to support it at all. I'm kidding. But so LendUp, we basically built our business model. No debt traps. We don't do rollovers. If you can't pay your loan back at the end of the duration, we work with you to find a way for you to pay it back. We don't encourage rollovers. We don't let you refinance your loan. We just we work with you to set up payment plans and to find ways to pay back without piling on fees. And we do this. I actually meant to change the slide.
Without adding any fees.
What's that?
Without adding any fees.
Without adding any fees. Did I not say?
You said without adding too many fees or something.
Sorry, without adding any fees. That should be made very clear.
By the way, that's one of the founders of LendUp who's here commenting from the peanut gallery.
Peanut gallery. Ignore that man. I don't know who he is.
From the blueberry gallery.
Yeah, so basically we built the company. I was making a joke when I said basically we're angels. I actually meant to change the slide, but didn't. But we have a good business model. We built it from the ground up with good intentions, a good mission. It's intrinsic to the company, and our business model is built from the ground up to only work when people pay us back, not when they go further into debt. This means that we don't have to unravel the sort of reliance on fees that a lot of the incumbents have had to basically deal with. And what we build is ladders, not chutes. The core of the LendUp product is what we call the LendUp ladder, which basically is a point system that rewards responsible borrowing and credit behavior by helping customers move up our ladder towards higher dollar amount loans at lower interest rates for longer periods of time. And then ultimately, they can take loans out that report to major credit bureaus, which helps them build their FICO score and get back into the prime credit market. So that's the crux of how LendUp works. That's the crux of what we built in order to, or what we're still building in order to help people and to accomplish our mission, which is core to the company. Core to this particular, sorry, I'm just going to grab a little sip of water here real quick. I've just been going. Core to this is the principle that we need people to repay on time. It's good for us. Our business model works when they repay on time and in full, and it's good for our customers because it is the correct, it's the right kind of credit behavior that we're trying to incentivize. And then they also don't incur overdraft fees from their bank. Like we don't charge fees for late stuff, but if people have a bounced check, their bank will charge them overdraft fees, and we don't want that to happen. That's bad for them, bad for us. So repayment is a big part of what we're trying to do, and we're always looking for how to improve it. This is action design where people here are often thinking about how do we change customers' behavior. And there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about getting people to actually sign up for the product, the conversion flow, and those sorts of things. But we mostly want to focus on repayment because that's, like I said, core to what we're doing and stuff that we've done a lot of testing on. So there's a few ways that we approach these sorts of problems. There's not sort of a one-size-fits-all solution for how we design things that help people improve repayment behavior. I'm going to talk about three kind of high-scale approaches, high-level approaches to how we do it. Number one is a big test. And a big test is big ideas, may involve some big effort, and it's ostensibly going to have some big payoff. That's, you want that to be pretty in line. So the first big test I'll talk about, or the only big test I'll talk about actually, sorry, moving to other stuff later. But anyway, so one of the big tests that we did is an honor code study. Now, this came about, Sasha and I attended Dan Ariely's Startup Economics conference about, what was that, 4 years ago? Yeah. And here's us with Dan. Are you guys familiar with Dan Ariely and all of his behavioral economics work?
Yep.
Like that?
Yay!
We're clapping for, I know, he looks so young. So here we are with him, and through that we met Sion. Sion is a behavioral economics professor at Swarthmore. I think when we met him, he was a PhD candidate at Harvard. Yeah. So we met him through the conference, and we made good friends with him through that conference. And he had some really interesting ideas, some papers that he wanted to write, and some really interesting studies that he wanted to run. So we worked with him on this honor code study. And the crux of the study was basically we wanted to study the impact of explicit promises to an institution on repayment behavior. There's been a lot of academic studies on explicit promises that people make peer-to-peer, but there hadn't been too much on making like a promise to an institution. So we wanted to study what that would do, if that could improve repayment behavior. What we did is we had various honor pledges that a customer would be presented with at loan origination. A bunch of different treatments of that, and then we wanted to look and see what that did for repayment. We were trying to leverage guilt aversion and the desire to see ourselves as moral to sort of leverage those things to see if we could get increase in repayment. Does this kind of make sense as a general? I'm just seeing nodding heads. Cool. We'll move on. We also wanted to avoid the cognitive dissonance of not keeping a pledge. Using some big fancy behavioral economics type words just to make it sound like I know what I'm talking about.
Did you have to go look those up, or did you remember?
I looked. Yeah, I know this stuff. This stuff I know. I've been to the Startup Economics conference. I know these things. I've read books. So what this actually looked like is this was a few years ago. We had we've grown since then. But so at this point we bucketed. We ran this test for not super long, and we bucketed about 5,000 borrowers in this test. They were randomly bucketed into 3 treatments. One was a simple treatment, which is basically at the very end of your application flow. I'll show you some screenshots in a second, but I'll describe them first because it's more fun. At the end of the application flow, there was just an honor code that you said, like, I promise to repay this loan. And they would just click a button and sign it. It signed it in a handwriting font, so it felt like they were actually signing it, maybe. I don't know. That was our theory. So that was a simple treatment. A copy treatment where we had an honor code and it said something like along the lines of, I pledge to repay this loan in time and on time and in full, on this date. And you're supposed to take that text and copy it, typing, into a text box, which was also using a handwriting font, so it appeared as though you wrote it. And then there was a write-in, which basically gives you an example of a type of honor code, and it said, write your own in this text box. Again, handwriting. And then those 3 buckets were actually split into 2 categories, and half of them would receive a reminder in an email that we sent out right before their payment was due, and the other half did not see that reminder. The reminder had an image of the honor code that they had signed or written or copied. So that's how the study was designed. They looked like this. This is why I described it. It's going to be hard for you guys to see kind of what this looks like from there. But that's what they basically look like. This was a few years ago, so you'll notice the skeuomorphic design. We've got a little flatter since then, so just so you guys know from a visual design standpoint. Although we actually do have the page curl still, I think. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think we do. So results of the I meant to actually have this be a big reveal. I blew it. The results of the test, not statistically significant.
Science.
We're all pretty familiar with that. Yeah, pretty familiar with that term, right? Do we run a lot of tests in here? I imagine we do.
Yes.
We got a lot of non-statistically significant, don't we? Is it just us? Is it just me that gets? No, it can't be. I've read a lot of articles. Everybody gets these. Yeah. So, but yes.
Was there a control with no honor code at all?
Yes, there was a control with no honor code at all.
Okay. And so all the tests compared to that control had no statistical significance.
Right. There is a but yes, that's the general gist of it.
Shooting
So,
numbers, I swear there was a difference.
well, that's what I'm getting to that. It's not statistically significant because statistical rigor is important, people. You can't just say because the number bumped that it's right. Statistical significance is important. So it's not statistically significant, but there is indication that any of the treatments may actually increase repayment rates by a small amount. So, so that's the good news, is that basically we did find that there may be something there. This test didn't prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. But it looked as though, when you run the numbers through the crazy algorithms, or you just go to the website and put them in and it says p-value of whatever, it didn't give you the p-value you wanted. But there's definitely an indication that it works. So we're actually following up on this right now and looking to run a much larger scale test with a more simplified bucketing system. One of the things that we found out, one of the conclusions we came to is that there's a couple of interesting things about this test that kind of play with the numbers. One is that we just may not have run enough people through this, and that may be the answer. Is actually just running enough people through this to get to statistical significance will give us the kind of results we're looking for. The other one is that repayment, the way that our product works, repayment is the automatic behavior. So customers don't actually have to go manually repay us. So that definitely will skew the result a little bit. There are folks that just automatically repaid because of the way that we have, like I said, automatic repayment. So that's something that we need to take into account in the test, something that may skew things a little bit. Basically, there are folks that may have repaid that may not have actually intended to because it's automatic. It's hard to tell that in the test. The only way to really get a good sense of whether or not that's the case is to run a bunch more people through this test. Yes?
Is there a difference in your mind between verbal promises and written promises?
That's a really good question. I mean, there is.
Yeah.
There would have to be. But one of them is spoken, and the other one is written. But actually, no. I mean, that's fascinating insight. I mean, there could be something there where we could, run some kind of a recording, and then send that recording back, or have somebody call you. You can promise it to them.
Yeah.
I like this idea.
Hack the Twilio guy and then call him and record it.
Oh, Twilio API hack. I love that.
I feel like when people say stuff, they connect to it a little bit more than if they're just writing or copying and pasting text into a text box,
Yeah, that's interesting insight. So we haven't explored that,
For sure.
honestly, but that's yes.
Before you decided to make this study, what did you learn about why people weren't repaying?
So that's a good question. We didn't really do too much research at that time to look into that. So the answer is we didn't really. I mean, yeah, that's not actually research that we did prior to this test. We've become more sophisticated since this test, so we can have research about it now, but nothing prior to this. We just, assumed they didn't want to. No, I'm kidding. But it's, yeah, we didn't have a strong hypothesis to answer that question.
We were an unfunded 7-person startup at that time. And we were just trying to do anything we possibly could think of really quickly.
Yeah, totally.
Now we have all sorts of free time and money, so we're just
Is repayment correlated with economic cycle?
I mean, in terms of like payment, like when people get paid, or in terms of yeah, that's a fascinating insight. That actually you're jumping ahead. No, there's a thing we'll talk about that very quickly next. Anybody else on this particular test? We can also come back around once everything's done and talk more about these specific tests. The context may help. Cool. So that was the honor code study. The other thing that to look into besides big tests, which may have big payoff or maybe statistically insignificant, is small improvements, little fixes, little effort, and probably little payoff, right? Yeah. So that's these are things to look for in your app, or your product, or whatever. Little tweaks you can make to maybe change behavior a little bit. On that same note about economic cycles, repayment alignment is something that we found is very valuable. When people align their loan repayment date with their reported payday, repayment increases significantly, which makes sense. It makes complete intuitive sense. And in fact, it's something we've always known from the beginning. Well, we've assumed it from the beginning, and then we did some research into our into our current data and found out that that's very, very true. And so we looked at what we were doing to get people to align their repayment date with their pay date, and we don't want to require people to align this. We want people to be in control of their product. It's very important to us. It's one of our big sort of principles that people are in control of their loans, in control of their financial products. So we didn't want to force them. You have to repay on your payday. But we do want to strongly encourage it. And so we looked at what our current design was doing. And our current treatment was not doing a good job of this. It was not doing a good job of encouraging people to align their repayment choice with their payday. So, what we decided, the current treatment, I'm going into a little more detail of why. The current treatment was poorly worded, and it was an opt-in design. Basically what it said is, I meant to have a screenshot here, but I forgot to put it in before I got here. What it basically said, I'll describe it again because I know you guys love that. Imagine this: you put in your next pay date into a form field, and we look at your loan and that pay date, and we say, oh, do those things line up? If not, we popped a modal that said, hey, it looks like your repayment date and your pay date are not in alignment. Would you like to change your repayment date to match your pay date? And then there's a big green button that says, yes, change my pay date to match this date. And there was a smaller blue button that said, no, don't change my pay date, keep it the same. That was the treatment. That was our original treatment. It really was poorly worded. It was basically exactly verbatim what I just said. It was very, meandery and poor. And it was opt-in. So what we wanted to do was try out a new treatment that was opt-out. And then here we go with some more principles, some status quo bias. Basically, we wanted to look opt-out and say, look, we've changed your pay date. We've changed your pay date. You can change it back, but we've already changed it, so just click this green button to continue. The buttons literally did the exact same thing. We did not change functionality whatsoever. We just changed the treatment of the wording. And, I do have a screenshot of the new one. There we go. See, it says, hey, we changed it. And then there's like the green button that says, sure, I'll continue. And then the blue button that's like, nah, I want to keep the original. The results, you'd think just a little fix, a little test. It was huge! It was a big success! We went from 50% of the people clicking that button to 75% of the people clicking that button, which is a big increase. I'm not good at math, but I think that's pretty big. We were very jazzed. This is honestly one of the most effective things we've done at LendUp from a design standpoint. It was one of the easiest. We just identified a UI that was not clear and that was basically asking people to opt out of something, or opting into something that we really wanted to opt out of. That little change was huge. And so we just actually made this very recently. Its actual long-term effect on repayment behavior has not totally been studied, but we do know that they are now in alignment at a higher rate with their repayment date and their pay date. Yes?
So I'm curious, it seems like that would be super effective if people are getting automatic deductions, but not if they're receiving checks.
I'm glad you mentioned this. So the other part of this thing, and it's something that I didn't mention in the design portion of things, but we were a little bit smarter about, and this actually may play into this a little bit more than I was, kind of letting on. But we are actually a little bit smarter about the logic now of the date that we suggest that we're changing it to. And it's based a little bit more on whether they've chosen direct, because they self-report direct deposit, check, cash, or how they get paid basically, the payment method. And we use that to sort of tweak the logic a little bit. bit too. We actually rolled this out in stages, and we rolled a new UI before we rolled out the new logic, and the new UI did cause a significant increase, but then the bump got a little higher when we fixed the logic. So yes, good thinking. And
Why do you think people would not want to align the two?
honestly, because of with the other thing we changed in this, it hasn't been reflected here because we did this a little bit later. Our initial interface, I should have more screenshots. Our initial interface is actually, it's two sliders. It's a slider for amount and a slider for the days that you want the loan. One of the things that we found is that though people choose the defaults on those sliders massively more. They basically are the defaults or at the poles. There's nowhere in between, and massively more people at the default than anywhere else. So what we think is that either that UI isn't clear, or maybe there's just a reticence to use the UI for what it's used for, and so they're basically not being conscious about their payday choice up front, or their repayment choice up front, and that is possibly part of the thing. That basically, we don't see too many reasons for people not to want to align it, but we do see that possibly they are just missing the fact that they should be thinking about it that way. The other change that we're making is actually we're testing replacing the amount or the duration slider with a date picker, so that it helps you more mentally align pay date versus the day you're choosing to repay your loan. It actually makes more sense from a mental model of when people are thinking about repayment anyway. But yes.
Shane inherited a design scheme that was taken out of the number of days to repay for people that wanted to borrow a small amount of money. But it turns out that the demand is so big that the number of days, people don't think of the number of days, they think of the day of the month.
Right.
And so the original UI was a slider, how many days do you want to borrow, set to a default. And then since then, we've launched just recently more of a calendar style checker, because people think not like how many days do I need money necessarily. The simplicity of the UI was very empowering to consumers, but it wasn't also very natural in how people think about time horizons of money and budgeting, which is on a calendar, which is how this is. So now we have a calendar.
We're testing a calendar. We're just double checking. We're double checking our assumptions here, but yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly.
So this also helps because it empowers people to have a control about how much they do it, but it doesn't necessarily fit in their mental model of pay cycles.
Yeah, exactly. So we're basically trying to. We're trying to help people do what is best for repayment. I mean, this is a simple case of the UI wasn't working to do what it was doing before, so we're testing ways to make it work better.
Was this change inspired by testing with people or by intuition?
This was an intuition.
Right.
So
and then you confirmed it with testing afterwards.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually. Well, okay, so full disclosure, we actually forgot to A/B test this because we just thought it was such an improvement that we just threw it out, and it was. But then we were like, okay, statistical rigor, so then we actually pulled it back, and then tweaked it a little bit, and then A/B tested it, and then was like, okay, we're correct, and then put it back out. So now it's back out.
Right on.
But yeah, it's one of these things where like we want to test everything, but we're so used. I mean, when we started doing this, it was just like push code as quickly as possible, and you can't be like 100% sure you're right. And you can't do talks like this because no one's going to believe your stats. So yeah, so that's the deal. So these are like really great approaches for. Are any more about the repayment alignment? Are we all feeling cool? So these are really good ways of tweaking existing interfaces. But there's other stuff that you all work at companies. I mean, there's other things that you do. There's other products. Oh, sorry, I forgot to come back. This is my big reveal here. Little fixes, little effort, big payoff. That's the twist ending. Like M. Night Shyamalan up here. Second product. So all this stuff really works well if you have like a current product that you work on, you want to tweak, you want to improve. But what if you have more than one product? So our second product that we're just launching, we're just in a pilot program with, is a credit card. Also targeted towards people who are sub and post prime. Also, the mission of this card is to get people to do responsible credit use so that they can actually rebuild their credit score. Things like keep their utilization low, obviously not miss payments, things like that. So there's a lot of good credit aligned behavior that we're trying to engender with this new product. Difference here is we don't have anything in market, so it's a green field, right? Which is terrifying. When you don't have anything that you can start to test, or there's nothing in the market you can throw out and say, how do we improve this bit? you got nothing. There's a way to attack this that we utilize at LendUp, which is design sprints. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the design sprint process, but I'm just going to briefly describe it and kind of how we use it at LendUp and how it can be useful for solving some of these problems. Anybody like super familiar with design sprints? And probably leave the room because I'm just going to be talking about design sprints. Basically, the idea is that the process makes closer to perfect. What is a design sprint? It is a process that's pioneered. The particular version that we use. There's a lot of people with different words. The particular version that we use is pioneered by Google Ventures, and they've written a book on it recently. I don't know, is it actually out or is it?
It's out.
It's actually out. Yeah, and it's designed to jumpstart design ideas and to get feedback on those ideas very, very quickly. What it looks like is this: it's to short circuit the build process, basically, of a new feature or a new design. Normally the process is idea, build, launch, and then learn whether people are using it the way you would expect them to. This is design sprint is designed to short circuit that, basically get you from idea to learn really, really quickly. It's a 5-day process that looks like this. On Monday, you basically unpack the problem. You can also compress this into 3 days if you get really good at it, or 1 day if you're like us and you're super good at it. But usually it should be a 5-day process because you need time for this stuff. So on Monday, you unpack the problem. You make sure that there's enough stakeholders in the room that can describe what you're trying to solve, and you can all kind of coalesce around those things. Tuesday, you take the stuff you've unpacked on Monday, and you sketch out you diverge. This is where you start to think about different ways you can solve this problem. This is usually like the really exciting day, in my personal opinion. It's a lot of drawing on things and putting stickers on stuff. Wednesday is when you decide on one of the kind of directions that you've diverged on. And then Thursday you prototype it. Friday you put that prototype in front of real users, not necessarily of your app, but you basically go out and find people that are the target demographic, and you put them in front of the thing, and you do some qualitative research with those folks. What it really looks like is just a bunch of people pointing at Post-its on walls, basically just staring at the walls full of Post-its. That's what it really looks like. But what this process is, I'd be remiss to go into all the details of the mechanics of this process. But what I want to talk about is recommending this as an approach to solving problems in a greenfield scenario, where you can't necessarily run tests very easily. We found it to be an extremely valuable process for going through things. The key here is that testing is key. This qualitative testing, which is the Friday part of the thing, is super key to actually quickly getting the sort of signals you need to solve the problems you're trying to solve. Basically it's really important to build up the research discipline on your team so that this becomes a very seamless process. It can feel very daunting to do a research study with users, but it's always super valuable. And the qualitative is a huge part of the puzzle. It's not all quantitative. Qualitative is designed to help you get answers quickly so that you know what to quantitatively test. It's designed to help you get signal quickly so that you know what to quantitatively test. Those words both shouldn't start with a Q. Okay, so that's basically design sprint. I was gonna maybe talk a little bit about the features that we came to with the credit card, but we're still in beta, so we're still in a pilot program, and I kind of want it to be a big surprise when we launched it, everybody. So I'm not really gonna talk about exactly what we came up with, but I can talk a little bit about basically what we used that process for was taking a huge bucket of feature ideas from stakeholders all over the company and turning them into prototypes that we can put in front of users and say, is this compelling to you? Can you see yourself using this? Getting that signal, refining those prototypes, putting them in front of customers, and actually asking them similar questions until we finally got to a place where we feel very confident about what we're actually pointing our engineering resources at. We know now that it's at least compelling to the people that we've qualitatively tested it with, and that is hugely ahead of the game, versus building something that is completely blind. So yes, while I'm not going to be able to talk about specifics, I'm just talking about our process and why it works for us. So in summary of the whole, anybody have questions about the design sprint process? Yes?
Question. So on Friday when you test and you learn some stuff, does that get unpacked on Monday and then you kind of feed it back into another sprint? Or how do you incorporate what you've learned? into your
Ideally,
designs?
absolutely, yes. Ideally, you lather, rinse, repeat until you are at a place where you think you've come to a solution where, where the signal is strong,
Yeah.
that you're on the right path.
And in practice?
In practice, yeah. I mean, in practice it's a little difficult because you've got to like clear everybody's schedule. I mean, it's really important to have key stakeholders in the room for a lot of this so that everybody has context.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest challenge. Like getting Sasha in the room for this when he's, meeting a whole bunch of people all the time. He's doing CEO stuff. Does it see? But that's the challenge, right? Is getting the key stakeholders in the room so the decision can be made. So in practice, it is a little bit more challenging than say, let's block off 3 weeks and do back-to-back-to-back sprints. But the cool thing is that the second sprint, the third sprint, you can cut out bits of the part because you've already got the problem basically defined.
Sure.
So you can start to compress it down so that you're sprinting really quickly.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Anybody else in this? Yes.
Yeah, but that author did a talk recently, and he said that it prevented like rambling debates. So is there like one person that decides like ultimately?
So this is a great question. So this gets into a little bit about the mechanics of the sprint process, which is great. It's a good thing to talk about. So during the sketch portion, you basically you will each diverge. Each member of the room, you run through these exercises to basically diverge on a bunch of different ideas. Those sketches end up on the wall, and everybody stares at them for hours on end. I kid. But you do stare at them for a while, and then there's a dot voting mechanism where everybody has basically the ability to take a little dot sticker, and you do 5 or 6 of them, and you get to vote on the things that you think are the best sort of solution for the problem. So a design sprint is not a brainstorm. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. People are working sort of individually together. It sounds very like kind of hokey, but you're working individually together towards a solution. So the mechanisms are in place to keep you from just having circular conversations. Once the dot voting happens, it's pretty clear which directions are the right ones. You can have a quick discussion. You can maybe run through that same part again until you can really start to coalesce around certain things. But the mechanisms keep that from getting too circular. Yeah. All right. So in the summary, big tests are fun and neat. They're not always worth the effort, but they're cool, and we like doing them. But sometimes they are worth the effort. You got to do them, basically, is the thing. Small improvements can sometimes be super huge, so look for them in your apps or products as often as possible. And design sprints for greenfield stuff will help make you slightly more confident in your sort of solution, in your decided on solution. And that's the gist of what I wanted to talk about today. So thanks. You've probably been a great audience. I didn't know if you were going to be when I made the deck, so I said probably. And very importantly, we are hiring designers at LendUp. And that's my email address, my personal email address. And I encourage you, if you are a designer who wants to work at LendUp, which why wouldn't you, to email me personally.
Wow.
All right, so do people have questions from the audience? If not, I can start.
Oh, yeah. No? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Which is, basically, at first you talked about sort of grand theory, the academy. You're like, oh, we're going to try this, see if we get this amazing result. Then you talked about very practical, day-to-day design, and you have surprising results that are highly impactful. I assume you're going to always keep doing the second. Do you have plans to go back to the first and see, like, are there some other theories that you haven't maybe tested yet that are interesting?
Yeah, I mean, we have a backlog of these sorts of things that we want to test. We could use a few more designers to help us design some tests. And that's, honestly, there's some resource constraints and some things like that that keep us from getting as many tests in market as we would like to, but we definitely have plans to continue to test very large things. And even with the honor code test, the indications are, they're interesting. And again, we ran that test a while ago, and we've sort of, in the interim, there's been some mitigating things like, there's been some more legal stuff we've had to add. So the honor codes are not necessarily going to be as easy to test again, but we know that the signal is strong there, and we have to get in there and continue to test that stuff. So yeah, the appetite there is huge. The payoff for this particular test wasn't necessarily high, but that's definitely not going to prevent us from running more large scale. Yes.
So kind of on a similar vein, from a process standpoint, how do you decide when to just continue down this road of iterative improvement and when to kind of take a risk and do something big or sort of reconsider a whole part of your product?
We don't really have a strategy around that. It's more of an intuitive kind of thing. I'm sure, as a designer, I'm sure you feel it similarly. But yeah, there's a real risk of local maximums when you continue to test small iterative things. And honestly, for we've done actually a lot of testing also on the, as a growth stage startup, we've done a lot of testing on the acquisition funnel. It's not really what I want to talk about here because it's a little less interesting. We've all, I'm sure, done conversion testing in a lot of real ways. And that's the place where I feel like we're much more in danger for hitting local maximums. I think there's a ton of still small tweaks around repayment that we can continue to do and see improvements, and we're always looking out for those kinds of things. But it's a great question. I mean, at what point do you throw out the, in a conversion aspect, what point do you throw out the landing page and test a whole new one?
Yeah.
This is not a plug for your product, but I mean, if it's easy to do that, then it's definitely. What point do you make that decision? Yeah.
You work with that one professor from Stanford. Do you guys still continue to work with academic institutions, and what is that relationship?
Not really. I mean, we still talk to Sion all the time, and he's got other new ideas for studies that he wants to run. Interestingly, academia is very interesting. I mean, we did that study, what was that, 2.5 years ago, something like that?
Yeah.
And I think he just finished the paper like a few months ago. So it's academia, like they just it took him, they mull over stuff. They get to do whatever.
They care more about statistical significance.
Yeah, they're more about rigor, and so we want to definitely move a little more quickly. I mean, obviously keeping statistical rigor is important, guys. But yeah, so we definitely want to continue to work with academia. It's finding the kind of engagements that make sense for both parties is not not always super easy. But Sion's got different ideas that he wants to run, and he's real fun to work with. So we'll definitely work with him some more.
In your mind, what made one test big, one test small?
A level of effort. Just kind of
implementing.
Just in terms of implementing and designing.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I guess maybe I didn't make that super clear. So that to me. I mean, that's why it's like if you have a small improvement, just go for it. You don't know how big it can be. So, but yes, the size was level of effort.
Can you remember a time where you made a change and it went terribly?
Yes, actually, but this is definitely not a conversion thing. So we have this. I don't know how much deep you want me to go into details. It's a good one. So Lise is a designer that works with. She's sitting up there. We worked together really. We did actually a Google Ventures sprint on our application flow, and we actually worked with some of the designers from GV on it. It was really fun. And through that, we identified some places in the application flow that were just a little bit confusing or kludgy, or we could also look quantitatively and find that people weren't converting there as much as we sort of expected them to. One particular step was this phone and email verification, which is the step where it's like you need to have us call you with a number. This is really important for us to basically identify people, make sure that we can contact them. It's important for our risk modeling and for all sorts of other stuff. So, it's a pretty standard email verification process where you go to your email, you click the big green button, you come back to the site, verifies your email, or you can enter a code. And there's also a phone verification. And we had these two bits together, and they were a little bit, the parts of the flow where you actually have to bounce out of the flow and go do something else and then come back to the flow. They were a little confusing. People were confused by them. And then we had designed them so they were basically right next to each other. I don't really know why we did this initially. But we thought maybe that's part of the problem. And as we were doing qualitative testing, we went through a couple of rounds and came up with a visual design that we thought was way better. It broke the two steps down into two different steps. We qualitatively tested it. People seemed to understand it a lot more clearly than they did before. And so we went, great. And the next step is to quantitatively test that to make sure that our assumptions were correct. We put it up. It performed significantly worse. It was clearly a better design. If you guys saw the comps, back to back, you'd be like, well, that's the better one. But it isn't. And so to this day, we're stuck with this really kind of poor design because it performs better. We're going to revisit it when we have more time, but that's always the story, right? But yeah, I mean, maybe if you're a designer and you want to join LendUp, you can help us revisit that step. But yeah, that's one where, where we clearly, I mean, we actually went through the whole, we did a sprint, we did a test, everything, and it was like, this is worse. So yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
I don't like to talk about that in talks. It's a lot worse story.
If you look at brands that generally try to like subprime users, they have more like kind of old-fashioned brands. So it's probably something that like, you know, try to test it within the industry, like kind of older, spider-looking designs could perform better.
Yeah, I mean, there may be an
how it
argument there for
works.
sure. Like, it's an interesting, you know, I mean, we found that people understand I mean, when we first started this 4 years ago, the bar for design for financial services, especially in the segment, was really low. So when I was so jazzed when I was doing LendUp, I can do this, dude, I'm going to blow this out. Well, it's going to be amazing. And it was for a long time, you know, I think I will go on a limb and say that we pretty much best in class design for this sort of service. A lot of, you know, not necessarily direct competitors, but a lot of financial services have caught up. As I'm sure you're all aware, financial services is pretty hot for design and tech right now. It has been for a few years, but at the time it was not really, you know, there was a lot of rocks to kick over and make better. So that's one of the big challenges we have at LendUp is continuing to improve that discipline and make sure that we are still staying out from the pack. That's a complete ramble, but yeah.
You mentioned that your big test you maybe can't do anymore because it's questionably legal. Do you find
No, sorry, I should make this super clear. The test itself is not questionably legal. There was no issue there. The issue is that we have more sort of legal language in the application flow than we used to, so there's less room to put it. That was good. We're not breaking any laws. super compliant all the time.
All right, so that was like half my question, because I did education as well, where there's a lot of legal language you have to do, you have to deal with. So does that, do you find that has an effect on your ability to do these quick sprints and your ability to be creative and that type of thing with the application?
The short answer is yeah. I mean, we definitely, you know, we have a pretty strict compliance process, which can be fun. I mean, it gives you constraints. Designers love constraints. If you guys want to work with constraints and design, don't worry, LendUp. But yeah, but those constraints can make it a little bit more challenging, absolutely, to quickly run tests and to quickly make changes. It's just the environment we work in, though. So you gotta figure out. There's literally less space on the page to put stuff when there's more text that's disclosure-y. Oh yes.
So from your vantage point right now, what are the big trends in design and finance?
It's a hard thing to sort of put into. I mean, I think the focus on the user is a big one. I mean, that's obviously that's what design is, but I think that there's a lot more, from institutions, they're a lot more focused on what do people want and how can we build it in a way they can use it well, rather than sort of institution out, which is how it sort of used to be much more often in financial services. So I think that's probably the biggest one. Giving people what they want in a way they can use it when they need it. This mobile, obviously, that's not really a trend, that's just life now. That sounded really like, it's life now. I didn't mean that, but yeah, I mean, so I think, yeah, the focus on the user and building, you know, just sort of user-centered design, I think, is something that financial services has caught on to recently, a little bit behind other industries. But that's simple. It's a simplification, but that's the main gist.
Could you share insights on the most important quality for a designer?
Most important quality for a designer, I think curiosity. Is probably the most important curiosity for a designer. The willingness to look into a bunch of different solutions before settling on something that they think is right. And the willingness to look into people's behavior and how it can be effective through design.
One more question. Or if there's not another.
Yes. So you guys have classes, so these educational classes on the website.
That's true.
Do you find that there's high engagement with those? Because there's a trend right now where you essentially want the app to get out of the way of what the consumer wants to do. So they want to get their loan and get out of there and make their payment, right? So do you have any comments on that?
Yes, absolutely. So that's a great question. So the education courses are tied directly into our ladder structure. Basically, when you complete those education courses, you earn points. Those points get you access to higher dollar amounts, lower fees, and the ability to earn credit. So they're incentivized. They're not something that's just sitting there saying like, oh, you could take these if you want. Now you can come into the site and just take the education courses if you're curious, completely fine. But we know that, it's like taking your medicine. People are not going to come to the site and want to do this. But you incentivize it, and we find they do it quite a bit. And more interestingly, and there may be a selection bias here, people that take those credit education courses pay us back on time and in full, significantly more than people who don't. So we know they're super valuable in that regard, and that also is some of the stuff that we're trying to test in terms of what we can do in terms of repayment. But yeah, so we know people aren't going to come and just be like, I want to learn about credit card API. But give them 500 points, and it's something that they're more interested in doing. So, does that answer your question? Kind of?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
So
can we get a
on the homepage
concrete?
with a link, now we have a couple thousand people every week taking it proactively before they ever take out a loan.
That's cool.
And so then that adds also behavioral signal to risk level, which you can then adjust pricing for, because you know that before they come, and so we know they're not a new customer because you drop cookie on them. Then you can sort of track them over time, and then they eventually become a customer, right? No drop a set cookie on them, so that we can tell whether they
Yeah.
the first time, and then.
Well, we save the data. I mean, they become users. So
Right. Okay. Right. So we can tell when you've taken a loan and when you've taken education in order, and that inherently sort of gives us more signal about the risk level. So we just did that for my 2020, right?
Yeah.
Like 2 months ago.
Yeah. We made it live.
And now people do it when they're learning about the company we built. They'll also then go and take some education courses before they take out a loan.
Yeah.
So are they effectively still getting points even though they do it before?
Yep. It's true.
Yeah,
They
set up so
Yeah, they get exactly. Sorry, they get points.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily. We're still kind of working out how these products work together. I mean,
Right.
especially with the credit card and how the ladder works across products. But yes, they get points, and then if they do take out a loan later, they have those points on their loan.
Yeah, right on.
So,
All right.
yeah.
Let's give Shane another round of applause.
You guys.
So I want to thank the folks from LendUp for coming out tonight. Really interesting talk. I think the interesting part is you guys tried to bring together academia and practice. Didn't necessarily work out in that one example, but we're always interested to see what is the overlap between these two. Ideas always go back and forth. Really interesting application of trying to change people's behavior. Some of you folks were here for BJ Fogg a couple weeks ago. He was talking about behavior change, but you guys have scale, so you can test these things out a lot more quickly. Really interesting stuff. So thanks again. I wanted to open it up to community announcements. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that LendUp is hiring. They're looking for designers, but if anybody else is hiring and wants to make an announcement about that, now is the time.
Instapage is hiring visual designers and a UX designer. Sorry, not UX, just visual, UX researcher, visual designers. So,
Excellent.
You're welcome to find us any channel, Workable, Indeed, just look it up, our webpage.
All right, and what's your name?
I'm Oliver, I'm a product manager at Instapage.
All right, or talk to Oliver.
We're also hiring a marketing visual designer.
Great. Anybody else with jobs? If no more jobs, any events that people want to announce that are relevant to this specific group? If not, we can cut it off and continue the discussion off the stage.
Cool.
Thanks, Shane.
so much for having me.